The evening in the forest was a comfortable shroud of darkness, one the bears wore comfortably as they prowled the darkened passageways under tall trees. The chilly, heavy, earthy smells of pine, moss, and moist soil permeated the air. The canopy of leaves shook overhead as a light breeze passed, murmuring in the language of rustling limbs and invisible life. That night was calm, the kind that enveloped you like a blanket, consoling in its stillness and loneliness. The bears moved gently, their weight almost audible against the soft undergrowth. As much of the ground as the trees themselves, they were the guardians of this forest, the old watches of the wild. Their lives had a consistent, unchangeable pulse that had persisted for millennia. But tonight there was something different. The eldest and biggest bear, Ursa, stopped close to the edge of a tiny clearing with his enormous head tipped upward. His knowledgeable, piercing amber eyes peered sky-dark. Something unpleasant, a disturbance in the air, made his fur prickly. The evening was too calm, as though the forest itself were waiting and breathing. He was not by himself in experiencing it. Dispersed around the forest, the other bears had stopped as well. Their bodies stiffened, and their ears twitched. Rising her snout and sniffing the air, Misha, a sleek brown bear with brilliant, inquisitive eyes, raised. Though there was nothing unusual, the sensation was clear-cut, an approaching sense of wrongness. And then that happened. It was first only a faint hum, hardly perceptible, like the far-off buzz of a beehive buried far into the forest. But in a matter of minutes, the sound got louder, the hum rising in an odd mechanical vibration that shook the ground and caused the leaves to quiver and the birds to move frantically in their nests. With wide and alert eyes, the bears searched the trees for the cause of the unusual disturbance. The heavens burst in a dazzling flash of light without warning. The stars themselves seemed to have exploded, their frigid white radiance spreading across the woodland. Bathed in the sudden light, the trees formed long, distorted shadows. The animals, deer, rabbits, and foxes, froze in place, their instincts screaming at them to leave, but their limbs stuck in terror. Standing anchored to the ground, the bears squinted up into the sun. Unnatural, dazzling, unlike anything they had ever seen. It was not the lovely warm light of the sun or the moon. This light seemed to vibrate with an alien energy that sent chills down their spines. It was harsh and chilly. From the core of that brilliance, something quite massive started to fall. Lowered through the clouds, a ship, sleek, metallic, and humming with an alien energy, lowered itself with surface glistening in the glow of its own lights. Its edges too sharp, too smooth, like nothing fit for the natural world, it moved with terrible accuracy. Its enormous scale became clear as it neared the trees, like a gigantic predator sizing its target. Ursa stepped forward, his eyes narrows, and he growled low in his throat. This was no regular storm or celestial occurrence. This was something unique, something hazardous. Now the ship hung just above the treetops, its weight terrible. Then panels along its underbelly started to slide with a quiet, mechanical hiss. From the belly of the beast, beams of light cut surgically precisely through the blackness. Animals disappeared everywhere the beams touched, rabbits in mid-leap, deer paralyzed in horror, birds taken from their nests. Horrified, the bears watched as the odd beams pulled their fellow species from the ground and upward into the belly of the spacecraft. Ursa's howl became louder, and the other bears shook nervously as their instincts battled the primitive terror engulfing them. Nothing like this they had seen. Misha stepped closer, her breath accelerating next to Ursa. What are they doing?" Her voice shaky with incredulity, she asked. Ursa gave no response. He was not obliged, of course. They all knew what was happening. Somehow these entities from the heavens were kidnapping the people living in the forest without regard or justification. The bears, the old defenders of these forests, were unable to observe. But how could they halt something so large and so sophisticated? A feeling ran through Ursa's body as the beams neared. He initially believed it was anxiety, but it grew deeper. A warmth coursed through his bones, his limbs tightened. "Lo," he snarled, bracing himself. Then his body started to transform. A harsh crack rang through the clearing as Ursa's form changed, his bones shattering and reordering. His great paws shrank, his body rising higher, his fur rippling like a liquid wave as he grew ever taller. Their bodies twisted and contorted, their snouts retracted, their limbs elongating until, at last, they stood on two legs, humanoid, but still unquestionably bare. The other yelled out in horror as the same metamorphosis overtook her. Ursa stared down at his hands. No longer paws, but something else, something able of clutching, of battling. His fur stayed thick and protective, but his posture, body, changed to resemble those of a human fighter. He turned to face the others, their expressions echoing the same surprise and wonder. The same weird entity that had entered their house had bestowed upon them a gift, probably a curse. Ursa snared, his booming voice rumbling across the clearing like a far-off typhoon. "We cannot let this happen. We have to safeguard the forest." The other nodded, their terror replaced by a feeling of direction. Their metamorphosis had given them fresh shapes as well as fresh vigor and opportunities. They could fight in ways they never would have thought possible, but these were not creatures. What were they? And with regard to the forest's animals, what did they wish? Though there was no time to consider, questions flew in Ursa's head like angry hornets. The beams of the ship were spreading farther into the forest, grabbing more and more life. Ursa closed his hands, his sharp claws shining in the strange light. "We need a plan," he remarked, his voice firm despite the sense of conflict. "We are unable to directly combat them." "Not quite yet." Misha moved forward, driven in her eyes. "We have to collect the others," she added. "The wolves, the birds, the foxes, they are all under risk. If we get together, we could have a shot." Ursa nodded. "Go," he exclaimed. "Call them a rally. Bring as many as possible. If we are to survive in this jungle, every species there will be indispensable." Misha was not slow. Her new humanoid shape moved with the same fluid elegance she had always had as a bear as she turned and vanished into the woods. Ursa watched her depart, then turned to face the other bears. "Get ready," he urged. "We have no idea their capacity is. We will struggle nevertheless. Our residence is this one." Ursa stayed, staring up the spacecraft above as the bears scattered into the darkness. Tension permeated the air, the hum of the ship a continual reminder of the threat hovering above. More creatures disappeared into the heavens as the light beams kept sweeping the woodland. One ran out of time. Though his heart hammered in his chest, Ursa pushed himself to be cool. They had the advantage of knowing every curve the huge woodland offered. They might have a chance if they could entice the aliens into the darker, tangled areas where the trees grew dense and the paths were perilous. But his stomach turned over with anxiety at the idea of confronting these creatures. Creatures with technology so advanced, so incomprehensible. Ursa turned as slight rustling behind him. One of the younger bears, Rowan, moved forward with wide-open terror but his jaw set with resolve. "What should we do, Ursa?" he asked softly. Ursa studied him, noting the terror in his eyes. He lay a big hand on Rowan's shoulder. "We struggle," he remarked. "Still, we fight cleverly. We will wait for Misha to come back accompanied by others. We will then start our move." Rowan nodded, his face becoming rigid. "I'm ready." The forest around the two bears appeared to be holding its breath as they stood in the clearing, the stress strong enough to cut with a knife. Above them, the spacecraft loomed like a quiet monster, its rays merciless and unrelenting, slashing across the night. Though they didn't know whether it would be sufficient, the bears had changed. The forest had never been in such great peril. The aliens were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Ursa knew, though, one thing for sure. They wouldn't give up without struggle. The struggle for the forest had just started. Only the far-off buzz of the alien ship, hovering menacingly above the treetops, broke the dense and heavy silence that descended following Misha's leaving. Every muscle coiled and ready for what was to come, Ursa stood still in the clearing. His body was stiff. The metamorphosis had given the other bears and him fresh forms, but the sense of disquiet tore at him like a hungry animal in the darkness. Their once quiet forest had turned into a battlefield, and every moment that passed seemed to be a countdown to something far worse. Above him, the ship carried on its slow, deliberate sweep across the woodland. From the heavens, beams of light tore the creatures from their hiding places like spears. As Ursa soared aboard the alien craft, her sharp ears caught the far-off cries of animals in distress, their voices muffled as they disappeared. Tension permeated the heavens, vibrating with vitality, as if the very stars were seeing the developing horror down below. Though Ursa's heart hammered with a strong, defensive rage, he pushed himself to cool off. Being the leader of the bears and defender of this woodland called needed more than just pure might. He had to be thinking, planning. They could not afford to get right into conflict. Rowan came out of the shadows once more, his face austere. Unable to still, the adolescent bear had been pacing the boundaries of the clearing, his new humanoid form shaking with a barely restrained wrath. Rowan hissed, "I can't just stand here, Ursa," his voice low but tinged with rage. "Every moment we wait, they take more. We must act now." Understanding his frustration, Ursa stared at him, but knew it wasn't yet time. "We will fight," he stated with a deep and solid voice. "But not until Misha returns with the others. Rushing in without a plan will just get us captured. Or worse." Rowan closed his hands, his claws shining in the meager light coming from the ship overhead. And what if she not returns? What if they take her before she can gather the others? Ursa's jaw clenched. Though he had considered it more than once, he refused to let uncertainty color his judgment. Misha will be back. She understands these woods just as we do. Rowan nodded and turned back toward the edge of the clearing, his eyes searching the dark forest for any activity. He sighed sharply, obviously irritated with waiting. Ursa watched him go. His own discomfort was mounting. Every second that went by felt as though a tight noose were around their necks. He understood they could not wait indefinitely. Ursa looked suddenly at the far-off sound of rustling leaves. He stiffened, his keen eyes constricting as he glanced toward the commotion. The underbrush moved, and Ursa felt the worst. An alien patrol may be dispatched to search the ground for any last resistance. His muscles tightened, poised to explode into use. It was not an alien, though. Emerging from the trees, Misha had sweat and dirt matted on her fur and heavy pants in her breathing. A pack of wolves crept softly behind her, their eyes shining in the low light and their fluid, elegant motions gliding across the shadows. Among them were other birds, hawks, owls, and ravens, all seated on branches above, their keen eyes shining with intelligence. Though it was soon tempered by the sight of Misha's grimace, Ursa felt a rush of relief sweep over him. She had come back, but the way she looked suggested that things were much worse than first expected. Misha's voice, low and anxious, as she entered the clearing revealed more than I had imagined. "Whole families of deer, entire flocks of birds. They are sweeping the forest faster than we can gather the others." Ursa's face darkened, his hands closing at his sides. "How many have we accumulated?" Misha waved at the wolves behind her. "I could only reach these here. The others either already gone or are hidden far too deep in the jungle." The wolves advanced, their leader, a big, silver-furred male called Fenrir, bowing to Ursa. His bright eyes reflected the same intense will Ursa felt burning in his chest. "We're ready to fight," Fenrir murmured, his deep growl rumbling like far-off thunder. "We ones let them take no more of our kin." Grateful for the wolves' help, Ursa nodded. Their speed would be great in the forthcoming fight. They were sharp and fast hunters. Still, they were outnumbered even with the wolves and the birds. The aliens possessed technology far beyond human comprehension. "The ship is powerful," Ursa remarked, his voice steady but dismal. "Their beams could carry us before we are aware of it. We have to figure out a means of turning off it." Fenrir yawned gently, his fangs bare. "Just how? We cannot go near without getting taken ourselves." Ursa's head whirled in quest of a response. Their home and advantage was the forest, yet the aliens appeared to have no trouble negotiating it. He needed something more, something surprising. Regarding the ancient caverns, what about Misha said, her eyes lighting as the thought came to her. The folks close to the river. The beams of the spacecraft cannot reach so far down, hence we may entice them into a trap. Ursa took some thought on it. Deep, twisting labyrinths of stone and shadow running beneath the center of the forest, the caverns were. Their advantage of the beams would be lost should they be able to entice the aliens into those confined areas. In close quarters, the bears, wolves, and other animals would have the upper hand. It's risky, Ursa remarked, wrinkling his brow. Still, it might be successful. We had to act fast before they consumed any more of the forest. Rowan moved forward from his shadow-pacing pace, his eyes ablaze with fresh intent. Then let's start it. We cannot afford to postpone any more. Ursa nodded, his will stiffening. We'll break out into groups, he added, his voice suddenly dominating. You grab the birds and gaze skyward, Misha. We will want to know their destination and when they are arriving. Fenrir, your pack, and you will lead them toward the caverns. Keep them perplexed, using the roads of the forest, the ones we know only. The rest of us will lie waiting. Though hurriedly developed, it was all they had. Time was running short. They had to act before the ship could kidnap the last of the people living in the jungle. As the wolves and birds took position, their eyes shining with the promise of conflict, the tension in the air was evident. Ursa couldn't get rid of the fear that hung about him like a shadow as he guided the surviving bears farther into the forest. The aliens were unlike anything they had ever encountered, and he knew the chances were stacked against them, even with the benefit of the jungle. Still, they had no option. Their house and refuge was this, and they would protect it with every bit of might. As they sank into the thick underbrush, the forest darkened. The tall trees closed in about them like quiet sentinels. Ursa had keen senses, his ears tuned to every sound, every leaf rustle, every faraway branch cracking. The aliens would arrive shortly. They were out there someplace. Abruptly, a soft cry, high-pitched and terrified, echoed throughout the woods. Ursa stopped, his heart faltering. It sounded like a little creature, maybe a rabbit or a fox, being taken. As another beam swept the woodland floor, the light from the ship flared once more in the distance, brilliant and merciless. Misha said, her voice tight, "They're coming." Her eyes wide with terror, she had come back from sky reconnaissance. "The beams, they're spreading faster now." Ursa closed his hands and his claws sank into his palms. "We must relocate. Today." The group nodded and accelerated, their motions quick but quiet as they tore across the woodland. Though they knew these forests better than anybody, the road to the caverns was dangerous, meandering across small creeks and across thick areas of thorny underbrush. The topography could work for them, but Ursa sensed a subtle, sinister vibration that seemed to pulse the ground itself as they approached the caverns. Stopping, his breath caught in his throat. The surrounding air had shifted. The alien ship's hum had gotten louder, more forceful, and now it had an odd, repetitive pulse akin to the consistent thrum of a vast, invisible heartbeat. As Ursa realized it, his fur stood on end. The aliens were no only grabbing animals these days. They arrived for the woodland itself. The woodland pulsed with conflict. Every tree, every shadow appeared to bristles under the weight of approaching catastrophe. As Ursa and the other bears hurried across the deep underbrush, his heart hammered in his breast. Their hefty, humanoid shapes gave the familiar roads an odd constriction, the shadows heavier and the air denser. Above them, the alien ship's throbbing hum got louder, resonating across the earth like the pulse of an enormous invisible animal. They were arrive. The aliens were approaching, and this time they would not stop at the animals. Their sights were on the woodland itself. The group arrived to the caverns, a jagged, gaping opening buried behind a layer of moss and hanging vines. The cave yawned darkly, its depths swallowing the thin light that passed across the forest. Ursa stopped at the door and looked across his shoulder. His keen eyes glimpsed flights of movement among the treetops, and the faintest hint of light, alien beams, slicing across the distance from the forest. One ran out of time. Ursa snarling, his voice low and forceful. "We'll make our stand here." The other nodded, their features gloomy but resolute. They had traveled this far. Turning back now was not possible. Misha stood next him, staring across the tree line. She said, "The wolves are in position," her voice tight with suspense. "They will lead the aliens exactly to us." Ursa nodded, but his mind was flying. Though the caves offered some cover, the extraterrestrial technology was much beyond what they knew. To survive this, they would need more than just clever thinking and physical might. From the shadows, Fenrir and his pack surfaced, their sleek shapes quietly across the forest. Pushing up to Ursa, the silver-furred wolf had battle-ready focus in yellow eyes. "They're close," Fenrir snarled, his sharp teeth glistening in the meager light. "For now, we have managed to confuse them. It won't last long. They will be on us not too far off." The chest of Ursa constricted. The aliens had so taken everything in their path and shown no compassion thus far. He had to think their scheme would be successful and the caverns would provide the edge they required. But the uncertainty bit him like a black hole developing in his gut. "Once they're inside, we strike," Ursa replied, his deep voice faint in the cave. "We will benefit from the narrow tunnels. Their technology won't mean much in close quarters." The wolves dispersed, vanishing into the dense undergrowth, their shapes merging like ghosts into the shadows. Perched in the trees above, the sharp-eyed birds, ravens, hawks, and owls, were staring skyward. With palms closed into fists, Misha stood at the cave entrance, poised for the battle ahead. Minutes became what seemed like hours, each instant laden with expectation. Now the woodland was absolutely still, as though it too sensed the approaching peril. The hum of the alien ship got louder, the sound hammering down on them, dense and stifling the very air felt. As Ursa listened, his ears twitched, trying to estimate the invaders' proximity. Then a brilliant beam of light cut coldly precisely across the canopy from the treetops. The aliens were here. As the first wave of figures dropped from the spacecraft, Ursa's muscles stiffened. Tall, thin, and eerily quiet as they passed the woodland, they were odd, otherworldly creatures. Their limbs were too long, too smooth, as though they were fashioned from liquid metal. Their skin was a pale, iridescent gray. Their eyes shining with cold, calculated intelligence, they moved with uncanny grace. Breathing silently in the shadows of the rocks and trees, the bears waited. The idea was to let the aliens approach, in order to entice them into the cave's small corridors, where their sophisticated technologies would be worthless. The aliens moved slowly, deliberately, their brilliant eyes glancing over the ground of the woodland. They seemed not to depend just on sight. Every now and then, one of them would stop and crane its head as though listening for something outside the realm of regular hearing. Ursa could sense their presence. The air was so heavy that his skin crawled. The sleek bodies of Fenrir's wolves flew across the underbrush, remaining just out of sight as they started to circle. One of the alien creatures saw Ursa as one of the wolves emitted a low growl. The thing turned, its brilliant eyes focusing on the sound. Then it started to move toward the noise, with shockingly smooth motions. The trap had been laid. Suddenly accelerating, the wolves ran across the forest, guiding the aliens toward the cavernous. Fast, but not quite as nimble in the underbrush, the aliens trailed. The wolves were too quick, too clever, gliding between the trees like shadows as the beams of light from their ships slashed over the woodland. As Ursa saw the aliens get nearer, his heart surged. His enormous form was covered by a thick clump of pebbles. His muscles tightened, poised to launch. Though it was all they had, the strategy carried danger. First alien entered the clearing close to the cave, its brilliant eyes assessing the surroundings. It seemed to pause, as though it sensed something was off. Then it glided forward, its long limbs sliding across the air as it neared the mouth of the cave, with terrible quiet. "Now," Ursa snipped beneath his breath. First among the wolves was striking. From the underbrush, Fenrir and his pack explode with sharp teeth, digging into the alien's limbs, dragging it toward the cave entrance. Thrashing to try to free itself, the creature emitted a high-pitched, inhuman scream. Still, the wolves persisted, dragging it into the little cave opening. Following with their enormous figures storming for the surviving aliens were Ursa and the other bears. The animals turned, their brilliant eyes widening in shock as the bears came out of the shadows, with their claws shining in the low light. The fight was intense, the air heavy with the sounds of alien screeches, growls, and snags. While the bears used their pure might to rip into the monsters, the wolves raced in and out of the struggle, their speed and agility overwhelming the aliens. The small passageways inside the cave drove the aliens to fight according to bear terms. Their superior weaponry failed to operate inside the stone walls, and their lengthy limbs were ineffective in the confined areas. With his claws cutting through their unusual metallic skin, Ursa tore across one alien after another. Their bodies crumpling under the weight of the bear's blows, the monsters let out piercing howls as they dropped. But the aliens were unrelenting. Everyone that collapsed seemed to be replaced. Though his fur matted with sweat and mud and his muscles hurt, Ursa battled on, driven by the sight of his house ripped apart. The forest, the creatures, all of which depended. The ground shook then with a loud roar. Ursa gazed up, his eyes widening as the alien ship dropped itself still further toward the treetops, its lights blazingly visible. Something was preparing the ship, something that sent a tsunami of anxiety over him. "We have to call off this right now," Ursa shouted, his voice resonant within the cave. His huge form barreling past the last aliens, he charged forward straight toward the clearing where the ship hovered. Outside, assaulting its beams, diving at its lights, the wolves and birds were doing all they could to divert the ship. But the spacecraft had too advanced technology and too great power. Ursa arrived to the area just as the beams of the ship started to shine more brilliantly, ready for another abduction. Ursa jumped, his strong legs sending him skyward with a roar of wrath. His claws cutting into the metal, he smashed into one of the ship's landing struts. Under his weight, the spacecraft shuttled, its beams wavering. Ursa screamed once more, his claws ripping across the hull of the spacecraft. As the metal creased under his power, sparks flashed. There was a short circuit within the ship. The lights flashed, the engine hummed, sputtering. The ship's beam went off totally then, with a loud crack. The ship whirled in the air, unstable, then fell thunderingly into the trees. Confounded by the collision, the surviving aliens staggered and stumbled. Seizing the opportunity, Ursa and his friends launched their last assault. The woodland burst in anarchy, but it was short-lived. Their ship wrecked, their forces dispersed, the aliens were overrun. Silence descended the woodland once the last alien dropped. Standing in the clearing, Ursa's body shook from the strain, and his breath came in jagged spurts. The other animals surfaced from their hiding places around him, their eyes wide with wonder and relief. The forest was still under protection. For now.